What's up, guys? This started out as a video about King Solomon and the Jinn, and it took an unexpected twist, and I'm just going to let it run the way it happened. The Bible talks about the great and wise King Solomon, and they kind of focus on that part of things. And he's known to the Muslims, and as you'll see in this video, he's even known by the Tibetans because he flew there. And this is thousands of years before man was supposed to have the ability to fly, or thousands of years after, depending on how you're looking at it. But what the Bible doesn't talk about, and I think a pretty important little tidbit on the story, is that the great temple to God was built using the Jinn, or demons. Apparently, his famous gold was pointed out by Jinn. But I want to start out with what Nicholas Roerich wrote about him. So Nicholas and Helena Roerich were basically what you would think of as the Hollywood movie of the late 1800s, early 1900s explorers gallivanting around the world, high class, well educated, well funded intellectuals and mystics. Now, if you don't know, in this general time frame, people were super into the paranormal. It was the hip thing to be into, the Tartaria of its day. So all of these high society types would hold seances and do Ouija board. And of course, probably 99% of all of it was grifters. But that still leaves the 1% that's the genuine article. I'm sure everybody's heard of the high-ranking Germansies that were into the occult and esoteric. Well, it wasn't just them. All the governments around the world were actually seeking out this information and artifacts. Nicholas and Helena were, let's say, Tartarian, because I can't really say the R country right now because of everything that's going on. So we'll say Tartarian expatriates. But they defected to the U.S. and the U.S. sent them, I think, twice over to Tibet. And one of the times it was under the guise of erosional plant studies. But what they were really looking for was an entrance to Shambhala. And there was also a stone that was a fragment of a meteorite that could help locate the entrances to Shambhala, the inner earth city. But I'm kind of jealous that I am not alive in this time frame. And it would have been so cool to have an opportunity to be the real life Indiana Jones type. And that's what they were. They were well educated with some cojones to take a 5-year expedition into what is basically complete uncharted territory to Westerners. They claim to have failed in their expedition and didn't find anything, and there's like a 12-month period in there of a 5-year expedition that is unaccounted for, so some people have speculated that they actually did find something. They stopped off in Moscow, which was a little bit out of the way for some reason, so a lot of people speculate that they were double agents, but they knew people in high places in America. FDR personally sent them on these missions to Tibet. They've got their own museum in, I believe it was in Manhattan. And the Roerich Pact is, they say, in defense of cultural objects and discoveries and all of that, which that means that we appropriate all ancient cultures to ourselves. Nicholas is also a painter, and they say they literally came out with bales of paintings. It was something like 3,000 works of art that he created on the road. So I'm going to show you guys his awesome paintings here, and as things go on, they start getting more and more esoteric. But I'll show you his art while I read you what he wrote about his trip to Tibet and how this all ties into King Solomon. This is 1934. Today, the front pages of all our newspapers are devoted to the daring attempts to conquer space and air. And in the sandy desert, your guide tells you of the flying apparatuses of King Solomon. Up till now, in the people's conception, and he's talking about the Tibetan people, King Solomon soars on his miraculous flying device over the vast spaces of Asia. Many mountains in Asia are crowned either with ruins or stones bearing the imprint of his foot or his knee as evidence of his long-enduring prayers. These are the so-called Thrones of Solomon. Has anybody noticed how the internet keeps getting smaller and smaller? And I'm serious. Like, all the information is just going away and it's getting down to nothing. None of this comes up on any Google search. The Thrones of Solomon that I was just talking about, nothing. The Jinn or the demons controlled by Solomon, nothing. The story of him, magically teleporting the Queen of Sheba's throne instantaneously, nothing. I can go to other people. I know where to find this stuff, but if you just search this stuff straight out, and I've been doing this a lot for 3 years, making all these videos, everything's disappearing from the internet, but that's a different subject. Anyway, you look at these temples up on these mountaintops and you wonder what the inspiration was. I wonder if this had anything to do with it. But he continues, the great king flew to these mountains. He reached all heights. He left behind him the cares of rulership and here refreshed his spirit. The mountain of Solomon, again, can't find it. The hidden treasures of Solomon, the wisdom of Solomon, and the mysterious power of the ring of Solomon. To whom else has Asia paid so much admiration and so much respect? Now, it's really interesting that he says it like that, because I would say the Buddha, they paid that much respect to the Buddha. And, wow, okay, I didn't know this at the beginning of the video. I'm still kind of in shock here, because nowadays what it says is that according to local legend, some years ago when His Holiness the Dalai Lama flew over Tuva, he saw the glowing light of the Buddha's footprint. So here we have Nicholas Roerich, who went there and obviously saw the place. He made all of these paintings of all of these places all around Tibet. And he says that local legend is that King Solomon flew to all of these mountaintops and that he left his footprint and they built the thrones of Solomon on top of these mountains, and that there's nobody else to even compare him to there. But now we have Buddhist temples on top of all of the mountaintops, Buddha's footprints, and they still have a story of someone flying over, only it was the Dalai Lama. Wow. I gotta let that sink in for a minute. They also say that devotees have built an offering pedestal and a 7-step stair at the site. For me, this is just too close to be a coincidence, but they say that the throne of Solomon had 6 steps and a footstool of gold. So if you add in the footstool of gold, then that's 7 total. And, well, if I just showed you a picture and said, this is a monument throne to Solomon, then you'd believe me, right? So that's what it looks like is built here. So that still hasn't sunk in with me, but I'm going to move forward here. So Roerich is still writing about the stories that the locals had told him. I'm going to skip over the bird of King Solomon. Other animals also served the king, which, by the way, King Solomon could talk to animals. But a Muslim who come to Kashmir with his caravan across the Afghan border told us that even ants helped the great Solomon to build the temple. Beginning with the great jinns, the spirits of the air and of the fire, down to the ants, all labored upon the building. And in ceaseless prayer, King Solomon controlled without interruption the work of the forces of nature for the creation of the wonderful temple. So Solomon has this magic ring on, and he is just meditating and controlling the forces of animals and even jinn, which we should probably talk about here in a minute. What exactly even is that? Are we really talking about some type of supernatural, interdimensional being, or is this Solomon's ring some ancient technology? I know that's the huge thing on YouTube, but before YouTube, when I would think of the ancients and being advanced, I would think along the lines of spiritually and telepathic, psychokinetic, maybe, I think the attitude of electricity and technology as the end-all be-all of human creation is just rather dull. But in Muslim tradition, the jinn were the first creation. They were the creation before mankind. And the angels of heaven came down and warred with them, wiped most of them out. There were a few left over. And Iblis, the best of the jinn that worked his way all the way up to the seventh heaven right behind, by God's side, was ordered to bow down before Adam when God created Adam. And Iblis said, no, this is clay. This is hollow. This is nothing. I am made of a smokeless fire. I am better than this creation. I won't bow down. So then he became the shaitan, which is, we have Satan in the Western world. And the jinn had families. They had tribes. They had everything that humans had, basically. But they were built of something different. And it's kind of a trip to think that there might be some other entities on a different dimensional plane right here on the same earth that can interact with us in a certain way. Now, I know it's foolish to even consider that. I mean, how ridiculous superstitious are you? Well, that's kind of a pre-programmed thing for us, isn't it? Because all these higher ups they've taken over the religions, the churches. We all know they do some weird stuff that I can't talk about. And guess what? They're the ones with all of the money and power. So are they just that much smarter than everybody else, or is there something more going on? Just something to think about. Let's go on with Roerich's story. When the strength of the king began to fade and he knew that his time to pass into another world was near, he commanded the jinns to complete the building without him. But the tempestuous spirits replied that on earth they would agree to submit themselves only to him, but that without him they were freed. Then King Solomon, strengthening himself spiritually and leaning on his staff, remained in the temple, summoning all his powers to the task. Although at the moment his spirit departed, the body remained motionless and erect so that the tempestuous jinns might not fly away. And no living being nor any jinn knew that the spirit of the king had already departed, nor did they dare approach the motionless ruler. Finally, the smallest co-worker of the king, the ant, began to gnaw at the staff of the king until the wood, having been eaten through, the body of the king fell, and all saw that his spirit had departed, but the great temple remained. This just keeps getting crazier and crazier, because here's a story of King Solomon dying and nobody even noticing. He just is propped up by his cane. And there's all of these Buddhist monks that have just left their body in the exact same way. And without any interference, they kind of just self-mummify and don't decay. So seriously, what is going on here? Did Roerich have it wrong and switch the story of the Buddha over to King Solomon and tell the world that that was what was going on? Or was everybody actually emulating and worshiping King Solomon, basically, and they've taken his story and replaced it by the Buddha doing those things? Something is completely off here. So I'm going to do a little more digging, a little more contemplation, and we'll probably have to talk about this subject again. Static out.